I was at a presentation they did on this topic, very similar to this one that you're going to hear today. And that generated a lot of discussion, including among people from California who were there and really wanted to continue the conversation. So here we are. That's how we got here, and we're very, very happy to have Patsy and Amy with us today. Patsy Vinogradov teaches in the ESL Teacher Preparation Program at Hamline University in Minnesota and earned her doctorate in Education, Curriculum and Instruction, Second Languages and Culture. She teaches graduate courses in second language acquisition and adult learning theory, and she also provides professional development to adult education teachers in her state and I think in many other states. And I know her through her work on the Links ESL Pro project as an expert on increasing rigor in adult ESL instruction. Amy Vickers earned her master's in adult education from the University of Minnesota, and she has taught various ABE classes during her 8 years with Minneapolis Adult Education. Since 2011, she has specialized in numeracy. Amy had the opportunity to develop leadership skills through her roles as work team chair and curriculum coordinator for Minneapolis Adult Education. And so we're very happy to have them. And we also, I think you saw in the email, we'll be continuing our conversation after this webinar in the electronic community of practice. So we have Susan Gare here from Santa Ana College and Molly Sundar, formerly of Burbank Adult School. And Molly, I meant to ask you this before we started. I forgot exactly where you're teaching now. Can you fill in the blank? Okay, well, you'll fill in the blank in a minute. So they will be leading, there are California people for ESL and math. Molly was an ABE teacher when she was at Burbank. Oh, Molly got kicked out of the room, that's why. And she will be representing math, and Susan will be representing ESL in the discussion, but we would love to have all of you join the discussion afterwards. So I'm going to, with that introduction, I'm going to go to our presentation and turn it over to Amy, Patsy and Amy.
Great, thank you. This is Patsy, and we are so glad to be a part of this. I appreciate it. So I'm pretty sure I can click to the next slide. Let me just make sure. Okay, so here we are, and thank you for that introduction, Marian. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Oh, some people are having trouble hearing me. If I speak up, is that better?
Yes, I think so.
You can hear me now. Okay, good. All right, well, I will try to speak up here. So I'm Patsy, and as was mentioned, I work out of St. Paul, Minnesota, and I work in professional development for adult education. Amy, do you want to say a couple words before we move on?
Sure. I'll just add to that introduction that I recently have moved to Wisconsin, but work really closely with the Minnesota team still, and just am very interested in keeping learning about adult numeracy.
Great, thank you. Not sure everyone can hear me. It sounds like at Susan's site they were having trouble hearing me. Is it better now?
Patsy, if there's a drop down next to your microphone, and you'll see a link that says adjust microphone volume. You can maybe turn it up a little bit.
Is that a little bit better?
Yes, sounds good.
All right, sounds like
Thanks.
Other people can hear me
okay,
now.
So
Yay,
go ahead.
Good, all right. Well, we're glad to be a part of this.
Yay.
We wanted to share what our plans are then for this webinar. We have just 4 objectives. So here are the reasons that we've come together today. We'd like you to consider and also respond to this adult numeracy teacher knowledge base model that we've put together. And it's still something we're giving a lot of thought to, that we keep tweaking. So we want to show you our latest iteration. We also hope that you'll walk away from this webinar with some specific teaching strategies for adult numeracy in the classroom, and also to begin to identify your own areas of strength and perhaps areas of growth regarding numeracy in the classroom with non-native speakers of English, and then also to discuss some resources available for developing what is needed. Okay. So I'll let Susan and Molly, do you want to say anything more at this point about the after piece?
I just wanted to welcome everybody to the room and really encourage you to join us in a discussion that we're going to be leading for about 10 days after this workshop, just so that we can deepen our thinking a little bit and encourage each other to apply some of our new learning.
Great, thank you. So I believe we wanted to, let's see here. I want to just give a little bit of a rationale and the purpose for this discussion before we get into the content, really. And much of that kind of has to do with the fact that we're really in a great deal of change in our field. A lot's happening, and I'm sure you're all aware of it, but I wanted to kind of think about a couple of the things that are happening, some shifts in the field that are really pushing this particular work. So adult educators are asked to do a lot lately, and the field is receiving new attention and new demands. So one thing that's come into play, of course, is new legislation that's governing our field, and that's the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, that was passed in July of 2014. And WIOA, and I'm sure lots of people are quite familiar with it, but one thing that it does is really emphasize workplace readiness and also partnerships with post-secondary in the workplace really more than ever in our field. And so this emphasis on workplace and workplace readiness is, while it's always been a part of adult education, WIOA really spells it out in very clear terms. So these transitions to careers and college and deeper community involvement are complex and difficult for adult learners, and there's a lot that they need to be able to do very well. So one of the things that WIOA does is it requires that states align their adult ed programs to their K-12 academic content standards. And they also, in the legislation, offer the college and career readiness standards for adult education. And as this is what's pictured on the right of your screen, the blue book, many of you may have seen it. And this, the CCRS, as its acronym is College and Career Readiness Standards for Adult Education, came out in 2013. And it is drawn from the Common Core and outlines what it is that adults need to know and be able to do for successful transitions. And these are some of the driving kind of forces in the field today that are really moving us toward more integration. So integrating, for example, basic skills and specific career clusters, but also integrating language and academic content, such as math and ESL, for example. And then from a national perspective, really integration of literacy, language, and math are being seen and really put forward as the important skills for transitioning to college and careers overall. And this means starting earlier, not waiting to do math necessarily when their students are a super high proficiency, or waiting until they're almost ready for GED before you start working on math, really starting sooner with learners and ESL learners included. So it also means that we need to start recognizing these high language demands of this academic content. Math is not just the math that students need to learn, it's also the language around math, and what we'll be talking about today. So we're going to move to a poll. Yeah, go ahead, Aim.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, I just was going to move to the poll. So how about we do that? Okay, so thanks for the big overview, the big background, Patsy. So now that you should see 4 poll questions on the screen, and if you could please answer those. And we'll take a minute to do this. And I know this will be tricky for the group that's participating all together, but see what you can do with these poll questions. And you'll notice you're not able to see the results, but Patsy and I we're writing those down and we'll bring them up later during this webinar. So read these 4 statements and then just rate yourself. If you do these things rarely, sometimes, or if you do them usually or often.
It's totally anonymous, by the way.
And if it doesn't exactly fit your context, just answer the best that you can is what I would recommend. Okay, how about 5 more seconds? I think the numbers have stopped changing now, so go ahead and make your choice, and we'll write the percentages down.
Okay. Good to go, Aim? All right.
I need, give me 2 seconds. Okay, so I've got all
right, so we'll
those
bring those.
now. Let's
Yeah,
continue.
thank you. Thanks, Amy. So
Thank you
we'll
for
actually come back to
participating in
those
that.
numbers a little bit later. So we've given sort of a large picture about why we might talk about language and math together. And I wanted to ground that in an example here. So what do we mean by teaching language and math? Well, whether or not you're aware of it, there is a lot of language required to do math. Usually, of course, in a real life settings, the numbers don't just appear as something you need to calculate. They appear in some sort of relevant context that often is surrounded by words. So there's always going to be language around with math. And even if you are a native speaker, math language can be very, very tricky. And it involves what we refer to as academic language, and academic language is a second language for everybody. Nobody grows up in their home speaking academic language. It's the language of school, it's the language of the workplace, and it's the language that we use with people in power. So academic language is like, we could do a whole bunch of webinars on that, but we're going to focus in on math academic language. And let's look at this example. So it seems very straightforward. A thin wire, 20 centimeters long, is formed into a rectangle. If the width of the rectangle is 4 centimeters, then what is the length? So I'm sure you can all do the math. I'm not worried about that. But let's take a look at the language involved in this problem. So here's that same problem, and we're going to break it down a little bit. So suddenly the word wire has turned into a rectangle. So that's interesting. And this modifier, 20 centimeters long, is describing that wire, which is about to become a rectangle. And usually modifiers go before nouns, but here it's being used after, so that can be tricky. We're using the passive voice here, so that's not something we use all the time. Not all passive voice can be turned into active, but in math and science, the agent is often missing. So it's formed into a wire. We don't know who formed it or what formed it, but it formed into a wire, formed into a rectangle, that is. So that's kind of unusual. And then we have a complex sentence here, starting with a conditional clause with if. And then the words like length, a lot of students know words like wide and long, but then to use them as nominals, they've been shifted now and are now, the word long has become length, and that might be a less familiar word to students. So a seemingly kind of straightforward math problem can actually be kind of, well, a hard one to tackle because there's a lot going on there language-wise. So even a fairly, straightforward geometry problem can pose some pretty real language hurdles. And whether you're teaching not native or non-native speakers who are not super proficient users of academic language, language is real and persistent challenge in these math classrooms. So that's something that we've been thinking a lot about in our state, and only recently have we've really been able to tease out what it is that is so complicated for teachers and learners. And we're only a few months into this kind of verbalizing what it is that's going on. So it's exciting work, and it's fun to pull people together and think about what all is going on and the difficulties around English and math and when they interact. And what we're sharing with you is pretty new for us, but we're excited to, and we're hoping to get some response to where we've landed. But we want to give you a little bit of background. So Amy's actually going to tell you a little bit about the story that led us to the thinking that we'll share with you in a bit. Amy, I can't hear you. Yeah.
Thanks, Patsy. Okay, so in the past few years, as we asked for professional development needs from adult educators around Minnesota, the phrase ESL and math kept coming up. But we realized, that's not even really a question. That's just 2 words. So some teachers had shared what they had been learning and developing regarding ESL and math. And this was a good start, but we realized that we needed to spend time making sense of that phrase and uncovering the specific needs within it. So I want to share a bit of our story in trying to make sense of this ESL and math question, hoping that you can relate and think about your own experiences in trying to improve math and numeracy instruction for English learners. So our first attempt at understanding the needs around ESL and math was this CAN model. So we were hearing primarily from 2 groups, and you can see that language in that initial poll question that we asked you. So for group 1, it was teachers teaching math around numeracy were incorporating more and more conceptual understanding into our instruction. So we were teaching with progressions that built on a foundation of conceptual understanding along with procedural fluency. We had English learners in our classes and wanted to make sure that we were incorporating language learning supports. So on the model, you can see that group on the left. And then the other group was ESL teachers who were incorporating more numeracy into their ESL units. So this group taught math in the context of a language unit. So for example, finding discounts would be taught during a shopping unit, or using decimals would be discussed during a lesson about reading pay stubs. And so, that group is represented on the right of this model. And so both of these groups approached math from different perspectives. Both were interested in making sure that ESL students could succeed with math. So this was our start. But we found this more complicated. You can see me there at our meeting discovering those complications. This model helped us to start the conversation around ESL and math, but it would continue to evolve. Our understanding would continue to evolve over the next year or so. Patsy and I shared this model with the ESL and numeracy working group that included teachers from around Minnesota. So you can see us there working with our sticky notes. In this meeting, we discussed the strengths and the needs of both of those groups in the model. But then by the end of the meeting, we found that we were crushing that CAN model. With input from this group, we realized that the model really oversimplified the situation, and it left out important nuances. To the teachers in the group, it did not make sense to simply think about identifying either with the math teacher or with the language teacher. So Patsy and I took notes from that meeting and synthesized them into a new revised model. So then we shared that model with a working group and then also at a session at the 2015 National COABE Conference in Denver that Marion mentioned. And so from those groups, we gained additional feedback and now have a model that feels much more useful in helping teachers to improve numeracy instruction, especially for English learners.
Thanks, Amy. So, yeah, it was really interesting to take that model and share it with our teachers. First thinking of it very kind of like this dichotomy, and to be told, wow, you're really way off, and then to have a chance to really think more about that together with them was really, really heartening and really helped us think about this differently. And so we landed on really looking at some of this work coming out of Jeff Swears and his colleagues. One thing that they write is we need to do both. We need to build strengths. We need to build students' complex language as we augment how to assess higher order thinking and conceptual understanding. So just kind of coming to the understanding that it's really more complicated and there's a lot going on. So let's take a look at where we landed with that model. And basically, we're calling it the knowledge base of adult educators teaching numeracy, and this would be for anyone teaching numeracy, whether they're native speakers or non-native speakers. One of the things we came to understand is that since academic language is a second language for everybody, and because math language is different for students than any other place that they use language, that in fact we needed language use and development to be part of that all the time. So the model begins with the center, and we keep our learners at the core of our thinking. We both like to see things visually, so we've been playing around with this, and this is where we are. And so I want to talk a little bit about the different pieces. So at the beginning, at the center of this then is these complexities of adult learners. And one thing that we know as adult educators is that they bring lots of complex but beautiful things to our classrooms, and that most adult ed students have had some experience with math, some of it positive, some of it negative, but they seem to all have an opinion about math and their ability to do math. So we want to keep those complexities of adult learners at the very center of our thinking throughout all of this. I'll have Amy talk about the next one.
Okay, so you know, again, the purpose of this model is to understand that ESL plus math question mark. How can we work to improve instruction for adult learners learning numeracy, and specifically for language learners? So another component, in addition to the complexities of adult learners, is the component of strong math teaching. So as a teacher, you would ask yourself that question there. Do I know how to develop and deliver effective math units and lessons? And then some examples of math teaching, that could be things like being able to incorporate the mathematical practices into your instruction. It could also mean that you could incorporate the standards. It means that you could work with the levels of knowing math in your instruction, or perhaps the depth of knowledge questioning, that you would have that skill. And also that another example is that you would be skilled at identifying gaps in learner knowledge and skills, and then being able to work at strategies in closing those gaps. Okay, so that's the math teaching component. The next component I'd like to share about would be the math content component. So the question there says, am I comfortable with the math that I am teaching on a deep conceptual level? And then so some examples of a deep understanding of math content, that could be that your content knowledge is up to date with current requirements, that you're also able to understand those concepts from multiple perspectives, not just the one way that you are comfortable teaching it, but are you able to see it from multiple perspectives? And then also, are you able to make connections among concepts and procedures? In case your students are asking questions as they try to make connections, you need to be comfortable
Great,
approaching concepts from different perspectives.
And then the last
as well.
part of the model is the one on the bottom here, which is language use and development. And the question there is, do I understand and support my students' language challenges around math specifically? So as I mentioned earlier, academic language is a second language for everyone, and dealing with the language issues in a math classroom is not unique to non-native speakers of English. However, there are things that teachers need to know about how language develops and how they can facilitate that process best when working with non-native speakers. So some examples there might be incorporating language objectives and activities into your lessons, using language carefully and intentionally in instruction, and then watching for potentially confusing language when selecting classroom materials. So we've just touched on each of the areas of this model, and now we're actually going to pull back and go into each one in a little more depth. And I'll just say one of the really great things about working with Amy is I am not a math teacher. I have not taught math. It's not my forte, but I am an English teacher. So ESL is my background. And so one of the things I feel like I've grown as an educator is in collaborating with someone who is an ABE math teacher, that I've really learned a lot from working with Amy, and then our conversations where I'm thinking of it from a language teaching perspective and she's thinking of it from a math teaching perspective, and it's really been helpful to have this kind of collaboration. So I encourage you, if you have people at your site who teach something different from what you teach, that sometimes the best conversations come from people who take on this work from either a different perspective or teach a slightly different type of learner. Is sometimes where we learn the most. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Patsy. So also to add on to what Patsy said, through conversations over the past year, we've just found where this has happened with me and also with a colleague, where math teachers, we learn something and it feels like such an amazing strategy, and then we find from the ESL teachers that's a very common strategy, and most ESL teachers are very familiar with it. And so again, that just points to the value that would come from both of those groups talking. Okay, so let's go a little more in depth with the complexities of adult learners. So let's see. So the complexities of adult learners describes the various backgrounds that adult learners bring in terms of the skills that they have or have not mastered, as well as the memories and emotions that they connect with learning math. So one suggestion that teachers could use to strengthen their understanding of this area is to use a mind map at the beginning of a unit. So this would give a chance to directly uncover and then work with the range of backgrounds that students bring to a topic. Okay, so what you see on the screen, this is just one example of what a mind map could look like. So to develop a better understanding of the complexities of adult learners, you could try this with words like math or algebra or fractions at the center. And then from there, students would write whatever thoughts come to mind related to that word. So you could then discuss those maps in a way that makes sense in your context. So maybe that's one-on-one conversations, or maybe that's a group discussion. So this activity will increase your awareness and also the awareness of the students about the thoughts, feelings, and memories that they are bringing to class. Okay, so that's our example about how to develop working with the complexities of adult learners. And so now I'm going to open up a chat box where I would like to ask you to share other examples of how we could, as teachers, how we could respond to the complexities of adult learners. Let's take a few minutes and do this. We're pretty interested in your contributions. We'll go around and ask for your input on each of these segments. So please, in the chat box that you see there, please type other examples of how with adult education and numeracy in those settings, how could we respond to the complexities of adult learners? Oh, good. I see multiple attendees are typing. That is great.
Shall we have a little music here? Okay, we don't have to have music, but if the music's really loud, you can control it with your volume on your computer speakers or your headset. Sorry.
Okay, so as far as responding to the complexities of adult learners, it looks like, thank you for sharing all of these ideas. They, okay, so I'll just try to read some highlights. A problem that is complex could be broken down into simpler elements, sure, so that it has multiple entry points. That is a great idea. Wow, you these are just like too many to read. That's great. And so all of these will be we're able to capture these chats on the recording and then also separately. So thank you for sharing all of these.
Yeah, these are really interesting. I'm enjoying reading these. Thank you for your contributions.
I actually thought I would be able I actually thought I would be able to keep up and share highlights, but that
I imagine this
seems
gets archived somehow,
a little
so
bit
we'll look for that.
not possible.
Yeah, good stuff. Should we go ahead and move on?
Okay, so and also yeah. Let me I wanted to thank you for your ideas. Okay, so and also I want to do so thank you for your ideas, for sharing them. And I want to go back if you think about those poll questions from a while ago, as far as responding to the complexities of adult learners. So each of those questions were actually connected to each of the areas of this model. And you know, it's just a sampling of a question to get at that knowledge. But actually, for that question, almost 90% of you said that you often or always applied that idea of working with the complexities of adult learners. So this seems like an area where you're all very comfortable. So yeah, let's move on, and thanks again for your ideas. Okay, so now let's talk more about the math teaching component. So one suggestion for developing the math teaching component of the knowledge base is to incorporate the levels of knowing mathematics into your instruction. And this instructional practice has really resonated with the Minnesota numeracy instructors. It's one of our favorite strategies to use, actually. And so there's a lot to absorb in this one slide, but it's a picture of a worksheet that you can use to incorporate the levels of knowing math into your instruction. So the levels start at the intuitive level, so where you're connecting to what the learner knows. And then they move into the concrete, which is hands-on, then the pictorial, a visual representation, and then to the abstract numbers and symbols, and then into the application, and then communication stage. So ideally, with every new concept, you would move through each of these levels with your class. So what we found is that classroom texts are often comprised of exercises that work at the abstract and application levels. So that would be like the problems where it's just numbers, like decimal multiplication or ratios and proportions, but just numbers, or then the application where it's more the word problems. But then this planning tool challenges you to incorporate those earlier levels, the intuitive, concrete, and pictorial levels, as well as that final communication level. So, and this planning worksheet will be available on my website, which we'll share the web address at the end of this webinar. So, incorporating the levels of knowing into your instruction is one way to strengthen the math teaching component. And so let's do this again. Let's get your ideas. So I'll open up a chat box. And so please share other examples of effective math teaching. We'll take a few minutes to do that. So in the chat box, how could you suggest, what ideas do you have for strategies for effective math teaching? So specifically to math, not the full complexity of adult learners, but specifically to math.
There's a lot to take in.
I'll see if I can keep up a little bit this time. Okay, put it into context. Terrific. Drawing a picture. I think I cannot solve a problem without scratch paper now. I always have to draw pictures. Okay, have a mastery of the fundamentals. I like that, to have that focus. The context within the context of charts and graphs, because so many other things can come from that. Yes, and I see manipulative. So a lot of these are pointing back to that levels of knowing. So it seems like whether or not you're calling that, you are incorporating those levels into your instruction. So Cecilia?
Amy, if you're talking, I don't hear your audio.
Yeah, I don't either. Well, while she's working on that, I'll call out a couple other of these comments. This is Patsy. So I'm seeing some great ideas about really connecting to students' home lives, like bringing in cans of food or bottles and decorating their homes, and to talk about perimeters and such. Yeah, a lot of people really thinking out very contextually about some of the teaching that they do. Credit card balances, budgets. Amy, do you want to try and talk again? Let's see if we can hear you.
I think she got dropped out. Oh, there she is. She's just coming back in.
Oh, good.
How about now? Hear me
Yeah,
now?
we can hear you. Yep,
Okay,
go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, okay, I'll change my name in a minute. So, okay, thank you. So thanks for typing your examples of effective math teaching. This is one of the most participatory webinars I've ever been in. Okay, so let's move on to the next component now. Okay, so we've talked about complexities in math teaching. Now let's move on to math content. So with changes in the high school equivalency tests, and then also the release of the college and career readiness standards that Patsy talked about, adult educators are expected to teach higher levels of math. So I think it's important to acknowledge that teachers won't automatically have or remember those higher level math skills. So we will need to have resources available for gaining those skills and that knowledge. So for me, a very simple, easy way to start is just by learning from online videos. So, for example, when I was working with GED students on a unit that involved discovering the geometry formulas, I had to watch several videos to really understand how all of the pieces fit together. I shared highlights of those videos with students, but I really first used them just to develop my knowledge. So I usually start by looking at YouTube or Learn Zillion, and then sometimes I would follow up by reading an explanation on Purple Math. And also, I know that some programs block YouTube, so I just put up TeacherTube as another option. Although I've had less experience with that resource, so you can probably anticipate my question. I'll open up a chat box. So, what are the ways that you have found that you are able to get more comfortable with the math content that you're expected to teach? So this is, it's, nothing about how to effectively teach it, and just all about your own understanding.
Yeah, a lot of our Minnesota educators like Khan Academy too, Cecilia. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
U cubed. I don't know that one. Amy, do you know U cubed?
I know that one through the Adult Numeracy Network.
Oh, great. Okay.
People. Oh, it was Learn Zillion, and I didn't get to. I thought of that later, so I'll type it into the chat.
These are some great examples. So we got Learn Zillion and then Math Revolution, how to learn math for students. One of the things I have found helpful was to make friends with people who know more than I do. So and this came up earlier, the idea of just like reaching out to people maybe in your building, maybe in other programs, people you meet at conferences, find out what they're good at and just get their emails because there's nothing worse than teaching something you don't feel comfortable doing yourself. So lots of good resources here.
How to learn math for students. That one is new for me.
Yeah, I don't know that one either.
So I would just say that there's such a range available now. So whatever the limits are of one. So you could probably find another resource that will better meet your needs.
And then Marion writes that she will collect all of those and post them, so that's good news. You don't have to madly write them down here.
Yeah, good. Okay, Patsy, shall we continue with the next topic? Thanks for your ideas, everyone.
Right, and I'll just kind of emphasize the idea that there's very few people I know who like really feel strong in all of the areas on this model. So it's sort of the idea that it really just takes a village. You're going to find, I think, that there will be areas of this model that you feel much more comfortable with than others, and that it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just the demands of us as adult educators are really high, and it takes a team to do it well. So just, keep that in mind. There's lots of ways for us to keep growing, but lots of other people whose strengths are different from our own. So getting to the last part of the model here is this language use and development. And one of the ideas that we just want to put forth as a suggestion, there's lots of things you can do, but is to provide sentence stems for students when you're explaining solutions so that they have some language to talk about the math that they're doing. So those could look like this. I solved the problem by. The strategy I used was. Another strategy you could use is, I can check my answer by. The keywords that helped me were. I mean, these are not like sentences that people just use all the time out and about in the world. So just one more way that we can help kind of scaffold those conversations around math is to provide some sentence starters. So there's a couple other ideas we have about supporting math conversations that I'll share. Ask students to choose and read a problem for you, or another student to write on the board, for example. Increase your wait time. So when you ask a question, give students plenty of time. You know, as ESL teachers, I think most of us were probably trained to wait 7 seconds, which really feels like a long time. But you might even have to up that when you're working with this difficult academic language around math. Having students talk to each other is extremely important. You don't really own a math concept until you can talk about it. And that's something that I've really come to understand in working with Amy and working with other adult numeracy educators around our state, is that when students can really talk about the math, that shows a level of ownership that is demonstrated that you don't get in any other way. Solving the problem doesn't demonstrate that level of kind of knowing it. And then finally, to ask interesting and intentional facilitation questions instead of just what'd you get, you know, asking more interesting, like tell me how you came to that, or what would be another way, or how did that work for you, that strategy, for example. Amy, do you want to say a couple words about the connections here?
Sure. So as Patsy and I were putting this together, we couldn't help but notice that how all of the discussion around supporting language development connected very directly to the mathematical practices. So those are the 8 mathematical practices in the college and career readiness standards. But for example, mathematical practice 3 says that students should be able to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, right? So that's students talking back and forth and explaining their reasoning to each other, and being able to ask meaningful, challenging questions back and forth. And all that happens through language. And then also just that this connects back to the communication level of the levels of knowing mathematics that I talked about earlier.
Great, thanks. So one last suggestion that we'll put forth is to do a math word wall. Again, this is for that fourth area of the model around language use and development, that you know, math is kind of its language to itself, and there is a lot of terminology, of course. We don't want to overemphasize the idea that, you know, language does not the language of math isn't just the terms, so I want to be sure people don't leave with thinking that, you know, when we talk about language and math, we're just talking about those terms, the bold-faced terms. That's not what we mean. Of course, we mean talking about math, being able to decipher word problems, you know, all the complex academic language going on in a math classroom. But we can't get away from the fact that there are just going to be words they have to learn. And so some of that vocabulary, you know, can be taught with some of our favorite ESL strategies that might include having some kind of math word wall with illustrations, such as the one you see here. So one last time, we're going to open up a chat box, and someone else, I don't know what to click, if someone wants to do that for me. And the question at hand then is, what are some other examples that you have to support your students' language development around math? So maybe you've tried something that we shared, a word wall, or sentence starters, or something of that nature. What have you found? What's something you've tried that seems to help to support your students' language learning around math? Go ahead and type in the box. And thank you, whoever opened that for me.
So just, I wanted to tell a story about this while people are typing in their ideas. I facilitated a numeracy online class for adult educators, and there were many lower level ESL teachers taking that class. And they were the ones that really made sentence stems so just like come alive for me. So sentence stems were not in the front of my mind until I was involved in that online class with them, and then it was a theme that came out of that class, and now I just think it's such a valuable tool in the math classroom.
Great, thanks, Amy. So sentence stems and word walls, having students work together, absolutely facilitating that student-student interaction. And students who don't, yeah, if you can have students, there's quite a bit of research to show that when you have students who do share a common language, if you can give them some opportunity in class to talk about something in their first language, that actually facilitates the learning. I know you probably have a mix of languages, as we do here, but sometimes you have folks who speak the same language who can really help each other out. We've got some writing exercises. Someone mentioned eliciting math words that students' children use. Great. Trying to read here, let's see. A lot of visuals, use of conceptual things like, contextual things, like reading recipes and charts, statement of accounts, things that they would encounter in their daily lives. The cost of a staycation versus a vacation, that's a good one. Yeah, there's a couple of references to parents. For sure, the math, most of the math I have done in recent years has to do with the math homework my kids bring home. So that can be a really great jumping off point if you have parents in your classes and looking at the kind of math demands that they're helping their kids with. Anything else you want to add, Amy?
I'm just noticing Jennifer wants to revisit the sentence stems.
Okay.
So Marion, will the slideshow?
Yes, if you join the discussion on the ECOP, the Electronic Community of Practice, the slides actually are posted there along with a couple of handouts that are going to be available to you in a minute.
Great, thank you. And there's actually some, even if you were to Google math sentence frames or math sentence starters or math conversations, you might get some really good ideas. It's something that's happening a lot in the K-12 world and absolutely works with our learners as well. There's some really terrific work coming out of Stanford University and Jeff Swear's Understanding Language Initiative. The work that we're seeing from him and from his colleagues is really helping to think about what we can do to support both language and academic content at the same time. So if you haven't been to the Understanding Language website out of Stanford, it's definitely worth a peek as well. Lots of great
So
ideas
I think
there.
we need to
move
forward because of time.
Absolutely.
So thanks,
thank
you as usual, for your great ideas.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so to wrap up, I want to share this this quote, again from Swears and his colleagues. Teachers need to know the language that is running the learning show in each lesson. The more we develop students' language and literacy skills needed for learning, the better all students will learn the content in enduring ways, and vice versa. So really the idea that we can't tease apart language and academic content such as math. We really need to be thinking of these as intertwined, and that our teaching of them needs to reflect that. So a few resources we just want to toss your way, and then this PowerPoint will be made available to you, I understand, so there'll be opportunities to find these websites. But we did want to show you just what they look like, just briefly, and then we'll maybe have a minute or two for questions as well. So first of all is Atlas. That's the office that I direct. Atlas stands for ABE, or Adult Basic Ed, Teaching and Learning Advancement System. And we have a numeracy toolkit. And I'll show you how to get to that. And then the second one we'll show in a moment will be Amy's website. So this is atlasabe.org, and if you go to resources or the big red arrow, it actually, I've done an inset map or picture so you can see what it looks like. You can see we have numerous resources. It's growing all the time. Some of these areas have more stuff than others, but one of our big initiatives this year is to really populate some of our resource libraries. So you'll find lots of other ones too, but the numeracy one looks like this. We've got those domains on the right. And then the Equip Math series, which was a series of webinars that we did over the last 2 years that Amy coordinated for us on specific math topics. And then we've got some other numeracy kind of general things there as well. So that's one place to look. And then Amy, you want to talk about yours?
Sure. And the Equip webinars is a place to get content background as well, math content as well as math teaching, just so you know that. So this is my website, www.elevatingadulteducation.com, and I just wanted to point out a few things that we talked about today. So the follow-up materials that you'll be receiving are available on this website, and if you go over if you click on the self-guided learning at the top, then it will open up those, and also that worksheet about the levels of knowing math. That's available there under planning tools. So check that out as well.
So I'm looking at the time, and I know people may have to get going, but we can stick around for questions or comments. But I want to actually hold hold off on that for a moment and go ahead and be sure Susan and Molly know, have a chance to tell people how they can get involved with this after discussion. So Susan or Molly?
Hi, so this is Molly, and I would just love to invite everybody here to a community of practice electronic discussion. We're going to be hosting that for about a week and a half after today's webinar, and I've just been so impressed by all the ideas and comments you all have. I'm thinking about the topic of how to address the adult learner. I appreciated how Lynn talked about the complex math feelings, and Francisca, how you discussed with students how they've done it in their countries. We can discuss in our e-co-op things like how to teach math specifically. I know Joyce, you had a great idea about grocery shopping. Kathleen, you were talking about manipulatives, and Norman with recipes, Annette with home budgets. Those are great ideas, and I'd love to learn more about those in our discussion. And in terms of supporting language, specifically some of the folks from Santa Ana had some ideas about how to use think alouds or help students with their children's homework. Vicki, I'd love to learn more about what you do with surveys. And Andy, I'd love to learn more about how you translate words into equations. So these are all some things we could discuss with each other in our e-co-op after today's webinar. And of course, we'll also be posting all those great websites that we have been talking about today and that you guys are sharing with each other as well. So I'd just like to extend the invitation, and I would love to see you guys there.
Great, thank you. It's great that you have that follow-up opportunity. That's really helpful. So I had a couple of references here. Again, that'll be in the PowerPoint, but I'm just going to leave it to Marion to close it off.
That's okay. I will go to the references. I just wanted to come to this closing screen because it has the materials that you can download from here in this box on the bottom. If you just click on one of those and click Save to My Computer, it might go somewhere that you don't see right away, so you might have to look around because this webinar room kind of takes up your whole screen, so it might be behind there. But you can get those here. We're just going to be here for a minute, though, since we're going over our time. So you can also get these. They're posted in the ECOP, so you can go in there and get them there also. When you join the ECOP, you have to have your membership approved by an actual human being, so it doesn't happen instantly. It might take up to a day for you to get in, and then when you get in there, go to sharing discussions, and you'll see the second discussion is ESL and math, and that's where we'll be. So I hope to see you all there, and I'm just looking. Susan does not have audio, okay. Yes, just thank you all, and thank you so much, Patsy and Amy. Everyone, if you can go up to your communication icon and click the drop-down arrow and find the applause, let's give them a round of applause, because this was
exciting.
a really great presentation and a very good jumping-off point for us to start our own discussion in California about these topics.
Wow, I'm feeling the love all the way in Minnesota. Thanks, everyone. That was great.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to be able to do this and to share information between states. I'm really appreciative of that.
Great. Yeah, we should do more of it, absolutely. It seems like there's always great stuff happening somewhere else, so I want to hear more about what's going on in your neck of the woods as well. Thank you.
Yeah. So everyone, I'm going to close the meeting, and when I do that, and there's an evaluation form is going to open behind this screen probably, or somewhere in your browser, and we would really appreciate you filling out the evaluation and giving us some feedback. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.